555. Esther denounces Haman. Chapter 7. So the king and Haman went in to the banquet which Esther, the queen, had prepared. Two. And the king said again to Esther on the second day of the banquet of wine, what is your petition, and what is your request? It shall be granted you even to half of the kingdom. 3. Then Esther the queen answered and said, if I found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be slain, to be put to the sword, and to perish. But if we had been sold merely as bondmen and bondwomen, I would have held my tongue. But the enemy would not hesitate to cause damage to the king. 5. Then King Ahasuerus answered and said to Esther the queen, who is he, and where is he, who dares to presume in his heart to do so? Six. And Esther said, the oppressor and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman trembled before the king and the queen. 7. And the king arose from the banquet of wine in his wrath, and went into the palace garden. And Haman remained to beg for his life from Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. 8. Then the king returned from the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was prostrate upon the couch where Esther was seated. Then the king said, will it disgrace the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. 9. And Rabbona, one of his eunuchs, said before the king, behold, the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman has made to hang Mordecai, because he had spoken good concerning the queen, stands in the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him on it. 10. So they hang Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath was appeased. I thought they hang his sons too. Chapter 8. And on that day King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Esther the queen, and Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. 2. And the king took off the ring which he had taken away from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, and set Mordecai over the house of Haman. 3. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. 3. And Esther came back and spoke again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him, and entreated him earnestly to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews. 4. Then the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther, so Esther touched it and stood before the king. 5. And said, if it please the king, and the thing seemed right before the king, and if I have found favor in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy all the Jews who are in all the king's provinces. 556. The decree is reversed. Well, it's not really reversed. 6. For how can I endure to see the calamity that shall come to my people, or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? 7. Then King Achsherash said to Esther the queen, Behold, I have given you the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he lifted up his hand against the Jews. 8. And write also concerning the Jews as it please you in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring may not be reversed. Yeah, that's right. 9. Then the king's scribes were called at that time in the 3rd month, which is the month of Hezran, or June, on the 23rd day thereof, and it was written according to all that Mordecai had written concerning the Jews, to the commanders of the armies and the governors and the princes of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces. To every province according to its writing, and to every people according to its own language, and to the Jews according to their writing and according to their language. 10. And the letters were written in the name of King Achsherash, and sealed with the king's ring, and they were sent by runners, and by riders of horses, and by dromedaries. 11. In these letters the king permitted the Jews who were in every city to gather themselves together, and to defend their lives, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish every one that might oppress them, both little ones and women, and take their goods for spoil. 12. Upon one day, in all the provinces of King Achsherash, namely upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. 13. The copy of the writing was issued in every province, and it was decreed to all the peoples that the Jews should be ready on that day to avenge themselves upon their enemies. 14. So the runners and the posts that rode on horseback went out, being hastened by the decree and the king's command which was given at Shushan the palace. 15. Then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and fine white linen, and with a crown of gold, and with a garment of fine white linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. 16. The Jews had light and gladness and honor and joy. 17. And in every province, in every city, whithersoever the king's decree and his commandment came, the Jews had a great joy, a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land were alarmed, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. Chapter 9. Now on the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the time drew near for the king's decree and his commandment to be put into execution, in the day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to overpower them through the edict, though the edict was turned to the contrary, so the Jews should have rule over those that hated them. 2. The Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Achsherash to attack such as sought their hurt, and no man could withstand them, for the fear of them fell upon all people. 3. And all the princes of the provinces, and the commanders of the armies, and the governors, and those who were employed in the king's work, honored the Jews, because the fear of the king fell upon them. 4. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces. For the man Mordecai grew greater and greater. (557) The Jews are triumphant. 5. Thus the Jews smote all their enemies with the sword, and slaughter and destruction, and did what they would to those who hated them. 6. And in Shushan the palace the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men. 7. And they slew Shephiroth and Dalkon and Aspoth, and ate Palat and Adalia and Dirath. 9. And Aprasmoth and Desai and Adri and Zoth. 10. The 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. 11. On that day the number of those who were slain in Shushan the palace was brought before the king, 12. And the king said to Esther the queen, the Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the palace, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the provinces? Now what is your petition? And it shall be granted you. And what is your request further? And it shall be done for you. 13. Then Esther said, let it be granted to the Jews who are in Shushan to do tomorrow also, according to this day's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. 14. And the king commanded it so to be done, and the decree was given in Shushan, and the 10 sons of Haman were hanged. 15. For the Jews who were in Shushan gathered themselves together on the 14th day, also of the same month, and slew 300 men in Shushan, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. 16. And the rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces gathered themselves together to defend their lives, and had rest from their enemies, and slew those who hated them, 75,000, but they did not lay hands on the plunder. 17. They began on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day of the same they rested. (18) And made it a day of feasting and gladness. 19. Therefore the Jews who are scattered, who dwell in widely separated towns, make the 14th day of the month of Adar a day of gladness and feasting and a good day, and send portions to one another. 20. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far. 21. To agree among themselves that they should keep the 14th day of the month of Adar and the 15th day of the same month yearly. 22. As the days on which the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month which turned for them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning to a good day, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions of food one to another, and gifts to the poor. 23. And the Jews took upon themselves to do as they had begun, as Mordecai had written. 24. Because Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast lots to consume them, and to destroy them. 25. When Esther came before the king, the scribe would say, let the wicked plots which are devised against the Jews return upon the head of him who had devised them, and let him and his sons be hanged on the gallows. 26. Therefore they called these days Purim, after the name Passover, because of all the words of this letter and of that which they had seen concerning this matter, and because of that which has befallen them. 27. The Jews ordained thus, and took upon themselves and upon their descendants and upon all such as joined themselves to them, that it should not fail, that they would keep these 2 days according to their writing, and according to their appointed time every year. 28. And these are the day, and that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, in every province and every city, and that these days of Parayeh should not fail from among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perish from their descendants. 29. Then Esther the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew wrote with all authority to confirm this letter of Parayeh. 30. And they sent letters to all the Jews to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus the king, with words of truth and peace. 31. To confirm these days of Parayeh in their appointed times, according to Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had enjoined upon them and upon their children the decree of fasting and their prayer. 32. And the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Parayeh, which are written in the book. Chapter 10, 558, Job's wealth and piety. Chapter 10. And King Ahasuerus laid a tribute upon the whole land and upon the islands of the sea too, and all the acts of his power and of his might, and the glory of the greatness of Mordecai, unto which the king promoted him. Behold, they are written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia. 3. For Mordecai the Jew was new to King Ahasuerus, and became like chief over the Jews, and he sought the good of his people, and spoke on behalf of all his race.